So I think in New Jersey you have the same thing, where you have the scene that started relatively new in the grand scheme of things, if you look at, you know, the lifespan of certain genres. And it's just sort of exploding from there, and from the national level to the global level, just like you saw with, say, grunge in Seattle. So it's, you can definitely make the two correlations, yeah.
I think Seattle had its time, but I think New Jersey has always had its time. New Jersey, from Bon Jovi days, they were like the place where glam rock and all that stuff came from. And Seattle came along, gave it a little nudge. But it's always been back to Jersey. There's just so many bands coming out of there.
Gerard Way is often described as a highly creative individual who lives his life on the edge of sanity.
I'm just worried that you think I'm paranoid for thinking the way I do. It's just the way I don't think things through.
He's a very interesting character. I think the one thing that everyone always sort of talks about, and he always talks about, is his fixation on mortality. And I think that's one of the ways that the band really connects with kids. You know, teenagers are just so fixated with death. You know, I was fixated with death. I'm still fixated with death, and they just sort of tap into that, but through this sort of almost pop framework.
He scrutinizes every little detail. You know, it takes a week to do the album art. It takes, you know, a week to write lyrics to one song, and every move the band has made, I feel like Gerard has really orchestrated that.
So he's definitely a more interesting character, both his onstage persona and his real life persona. But I never thought of him as, you know, being the self-destructive, oh man, he's going to burn himself out by, you know, the age or whatever.
It's almost something that he's been creating like he would a film or a comic book. The way most people create that, you know, My Chemical Romance itself is scrutinized to that level.
I just think he's fascinating. You know, he's just clearly very intelligent, very creative, very disturbed, just a sort of quietly charismatic guy.
I don't think there's anything that he does that isn't out of, you know, pure creative energy and pure intelligence and calculation. He's just an unbelievable, brilliant kid.
The success of My Chemical Romance has also taken its toll on the band's most interesting character.
There would be times where I would say to him, Gerard, you gotta cool down, dude, because you're gonna drive yourself crazy. And he did, he really did. He was driving himself out of his mind. We would sit down and have talks about him, you know, should I start taking antidepressants, should I start doing this, I need to start seeing a therapist. And, you know, it was rough, it was really hard for him, and he went through this little time where he was agoraphobic, where he just wouldn't even leave his house.
He's walking a fine line, you know, between being very depressed and being extremely creative. And I know for a while he was turning to drugs and alcohol, which he was really public about. But that is definitely in reaction to that depression, but that can also kill your creativity. So I think he's got a delicate balance to maintain in order to stay ahead of everybody and to stay really creative and manage that depression and utilize it.
I never thought that Gerard was this self-destructive, you know, almost borderline insane person that he's been made out to be. He's always been really nice and really on point every time I ever met him.
I think it makes him think so much that he kind of gets a little crazy sometimes, and he kind of loses his grip on some stuff because he's always worried about other people.
Yeah, we recently did an interview with Gerard about the new album, which they've been writing for. They haven't quite gone into the studio yet. Yeah, the one thing that he was really emphasizing was that it's a more serious album. It's going to be even darker and more, you know, obsessed with death. Not that I would say that the band's past fixation with mortality was cartoonish, but I think he had a sense that maybe it was a little more childish and a little more adolescent, and that this is going to be a more mature look at mortality.
I think if they play their cards right and they sort of continue on the path that's been set out for them, that they're obviously going to improve their standings on the national level, but in a global sort of arena as well.
and he's clearly, you know, wants to like grab the kids and like shake them and just sort of wake them up and like you're gonna die. he's a dark fellow.
As long as they don't burn themselves out, and as long as this next album, whatever album they put out next, as long as that's solid and they don't do anything that would either go against their own sensibilities or the sensibilities of the fans, that they should definitely have that staying power.
When a band reaches the stature that My Chem has gotten to, it's interesting to think of what will be next for them, because it's not that they've peaked, but it's hard to tell what the next level is at this point, because, you know, last year they were the biggest band in the country.